The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Whether it's the rising cost of housing, unaffordable grocery bills, or an increasingly heavy tax burden, too many British Columbians feel the economy is not working for them, says Bridgitte Anderson, the CEO and president of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Earlier this year, as the threat of American tariffs loomed, the board called on the provincial government to focus on growing the BC economy by 3%. To build a future worthy of our aspirations and one we can be proud to pass on to the next generation, British Columbia must pursue policies that will boost our economic growth and raise our collective living standards, says Anderson. The board projects that by growing the provincial GDP by 3%, the economy will grow, government revenues will increase, and the standard of living for all British Columbians will improve. Anderson says, we project that a boost of 3% will raise personal GDP by $9,000 annually and will add an additional $4.0 billion to government revenues by 2030. The challenge comes at a time when the provincial debt and deficit are at all-time highs. The province optimistically projects GDP growth of 1.8% this year, a figure TD Economics challenges. TD projects a more realistic 1.5% growth for this year and falling to 1.3% next year. I invited Bridgitte Anderson of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade to join me for a conversation that matters about the challenges, and the opportunities to grow BC's economy. Welcome, Bridgitte.
Nice to see you, Stu.
It is a challenging time right now, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think setting the stage about how we got into this situation is probably important to ground the conversation. So
I agree.
You talked about the deficit. It's true. We're facing what is probably an $11, maybe $12 billion deficit. We also have a debt that has been historically the largest ever. It is more than doubled. It is going to more than double. We have more people leaving the province than coming to the province. We have a public sector that has grown by more than 55%. At the risk of those private sector jobs. So we've got this fiscal backdrop where we've got a number of very significant challenges. We've got a challenge on private sector job growth. We have more people leaving the province than coming to the province. And then we have the tariffs coming in. So it all is a recipe for very, very challenging economic times for our province. And I'm not sure that there's a pathway out unless there is a real commitment to economic growth.
So the Premier right now, and literally every minister that stands up and talks, points the finger at Donald Trump and says he's out to ruin our economy. But we wouldn't be in this situation if we hadn't allowed this to happen. What have we done that allowed us to get to this point where we were complacent about our economic future?
The economic problems in this province and really across the country have existed for many, many months and years before Donald Trump became president for the second time. We have seen stagnating economic growth in Canada for a long time. And so that's why many of us in the business community have been saying this is an opportunity that we cannot waste. You know, what's the saying that you don't ever let a crisis go to waste? So while we're facing this threat from Donald Trump, we need to get our own house in order. And so that means things like fixing our permitting problem. It takes way too long to get major projects built and even to get permits when you're talking about housing. The cost of business is much too high in British Columbia and across Canada. And we need to really dig in and figure out how we're going to attract international investment. So a number of these things have existed for a long time. The Trump policies have certainly made it more challenging and brought uncertainty that just couldn't come at a worse time for businesses. But there is so much that we could be doing in our own backyard, and we should be doing it now.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. You talk about the permitting process. I know that Premier Eby, going back almost 18 months ago, said, yes, this is a priority. We've got to streamline that. And yet I don't know that he's been able to make any progress whatsoever in speeding up the permitting process, whether it's on natural resources projects, whether it's on infrastructure projects, whether it's on housing or manufacturing or industrial land projects. Everywhere you turn, the wheels of bureaucracy just seem to be grinding slowly.
It is a real problem in British Columbia. And, I will give credit to the EB government that they have taken a number of steps in the spring to say that they're going to address this. It's a bit early to say how much of a difference it's going to make. There's likely more legislation that will need to come in the fall. But let's be honest, when we're talking about permitting, we're talking about projects that when you look in mining, take 12, 15 years to come on board. So if we're going to speed up permitting, does that mean it's maybe 5 or 8 years down the road, which is important for the economy, but it's not what's going to get the economy going right away. So there's things like permitting, but the ease of doing business, the cost of doing business for small and medium businesses needs to change. And then it's also signaling that to the international community that we're open for business. And I think when international investors look at British Columbia, they're not sure because of the uncertainty that has existed for some time, the economic challenges that have existed for some time, and then layer on the Trump policies. It really isn't a great front face to put forward to the international community.
So how do we change that perception that BC isn't open for business? Because it's going to take the people who are in decision-making roles, and many of them through so many different layers of regulatory approval, that have to get on side. Can we do that?
We absolutely can do that. The EB government is right now doing an ease of business review, and we are one of many business associations that have been calling for things like a change to the employer health tax. We did get a partial change some time ago, but it's not really enough relief for small and medium businesses. We're also talking about a return of surplus funds from WorkSafe BC. We're talking about an exemption, PST exemption for machinery and equipment, which would help businesses to invest back into their own operations and also signal to investors that, this is a good deal and we want to invest in your company. So those are some sort of immediate steps that would offer relief. There's other things that could be done around manufacturing. We are nowhere near where we need to be in British Columbia and Canada when it comes to manufacturing. We need to think about how we're going to leverage the strengths that we have in innovation, technology, life sciences, in critical minerals, in energy and LNG. So I think there's a number of things like that. And then when we look at other issues around industrial land, those are long-standing problems. We have got restrictive industrial land for sure. We've got mountains and we've got the ocean. We don't have a lot of room to move, but there's changes in policy that could allow for more food processing, that could allow for more manufacturing. And those are the kinds of things that the business community have said over and over again. They're not just important because they will actually change the way that the economy works. They're also signals that need to be sent to say, we're open for business and we want your business.
So let's just talk about food processing, because I know that it's an issue that's important to you. There's one small little clause that says 50% of the food that is going to be processed in this manufacturing facility on agricultural land has to come from one farm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's an impractical rule, and as a result, food manufacturing is not expanding in British Columbia. Instead, we're sending that food to the United States to get processed, driving up the cost. It's then subject to a variety of tariffs and so on, driving up the cost. And yet we have a minister who doesn't seem to want to address this one very important small issue.
It's a very frustrating rule for a number of farmers and food processors. And when you're talking about the 50-50 rule, what it does is that it inhibits food processing, which impacts our food security. But you're talking about having to send that food down to the United States or another jurisdiction for processing to bring it back. That's also not very good for the environment. So taking this move to make this change would enhance our food security at a time when we need to be thinking about food and energy security when it comes to the United States. It is good for the environment, and it also helps create jobs here, and it also kickstarts our economy at a time that we need it. So we have been calling on this government to eliminate the 50-50 rule for a couple of years now, along with other associations and folks from the business community. And it is boggling to me why it is not being done yet.
So what can we do to help speed up the permitting process around industrial lands? I was talking to one of the major developers in industrial lands, and they said their permitting process has gone from a year to now more than 7, and the attitude within the ministry or the approval agencies has been sort of like, yeah, we'll get to it when we get to it. We're not concerned about what the economic impact on you or the economy is. It seems to be a little bit of a mindset that we're going to live by the precautionary principle, which is I'm not going to make a mistake, and so therefore I'm going to delay.
Governments are always risk adverse, much more than the private sector, and there are good reasons for that. But I think what that mindset has done in British Columbia and Canada writ large is that it has stalled economic growth. So rather than saying no first and then trying to figure out ways to get permits done, what if we flipped that on its head and we said, okay, you're going to operate in a way that is environmentally sensitive, you are going to work with First Nations as you should, and then what are the things that maybe that need to be done, and saying yes first, and then being able to work backwards from that. And that's often the way that jurisdictions in the United States work. They can get permits done in days or weeks, where we take months and years. So we have layered on so many different processes and so many different regulations through different levels of government that it simply takes too long. And so if there was a shift in government mindset about saying, we're going to say yes first instead of no first, as long as these other conditions are met, then imagine how that could unlock development.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Do you believe that there is enough of a will within government to say, yeah, we're going to get behind business and make it happen? I'm thinking about a story about a company that I won't mention right now, but they were trying to build a processing plant in British Columbia. They couldn't get an appointment with the premier.
Yeah.
They flew down to Arizona, met with the governor on Sunday. A week later, they were starting the process, and they were up and operational within 1 year.
I know who you're talking about because I know the story. And so I think when you're asking if there's that will, you have to think about government. There is the elected officials, and what the elected officials want. There is a diversity of opinion among those folks. And then there's the bureaucracy, which really are the people who make a lot of these things happen. So the political will could exist at the top echelon of the elected folks. But then when you start thinking about some of the ministers that have to also align, there are a few ministers that maybe don't share the same views. And then there is the bureaucracy. Those are the deputy ministers, the assistant deputy ministers, who are the ones who actually get the decisions in place. I don't know that everybody's rowing all together in the same canoe here. Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the big problems that we have, is that we all have to recognize why economic growth is important. And it is important because you mentioned $4 billion in government revenue. That's for healthcare, which we know healthcare needs help right now. It's for education, it's for other social services. And so economic growth will impact and make everybody's lives better. And so stop thinking about economic growth as something that's negative, but it actually will improve everybody's lives. And once we all agree to that tenet, then we can start moving on from there.
One of the things that I find interesting is we're now saying, okay, we're going to run a trade mission to Japan, or we're going to do one into Southeast Asia. Trade missions kind of work. They help to open doors. But when a company comes along and says, okay, we actually want to go into that market and we want to develop that market, but to do so is costly, we need help. And we're not even necessarily asking for money, we're just asking for tax relief. You help us get there. Mm-hmm. And the government looks at them and goes, well, you're already doing business there. Yeah, we're doing maybe about $100,000 worth of business, but we believe that there's millions upon millions of dollars of potential revenue. Oh, I'm sorry, you're already generating revenue. You're on your own. Whereas out of the United States, jurisdictions go, how can we help?
I know that is the mindset that we have to get to in Canada, is how can we help? How can we get to yes faster? The trade missions, and I was on trade missions when I worked for Gordon Campbell when he was premier. And those were, big trade missions that included the business community. And so when I look at the trade missions that have happened, particularly over the last 6 months or so, They were very small. It was the Premier and a minister. Where was the business community behind that? And where is that show of force? I think for these trade missions to be successful, you need all of the players and the stakeholders in the room. So if we're talking about a particular project and, let's just say it's an LNG project, well, you need all of the stakeholders, you need all of the suppliers, you need the First Nations in the room, and you need everybody to go to Japan, for example, and say, we are all here together to make it happen. How can we get to yes?
And meet the appropriate people on the other side who want to do business with
Exactly.
Canada. So you actually lead into the energy sector, which has been an important component here. How important is it that the province focus in on two elements of that? One is that they're going to have to invest in building out infrastructure that will allow us to develop that energy sector, and two, then get behind the process. And I say that in light of the fact that I know that we've introduced bills 14 and 15 here, and then there's C5 at the national level. Are you optimistic that maybe we can move forward there, and that can help to generate some economic activity that isn't there any longer because all the major projects have wrapped up?
Those bills aren't perfect, but at the Board of Trade, we in principle supported them because it will get things moving faster. And so we thought that that was important, that if the business community is saying move things faster and the government is putting in legislation to help do that, you really have to be on board. We didn't love everything about the bill, and we certainly would have liked to have seen changes, but I think it's a good first step. I think, though, the other pieces that are important is Indigenous consultation. You have to have First Nations partnership to make these projects work when it's on their land. So, that is something that has to happen. And First Nations are saying, by and large, that if they've got some partnership, they want to make it happen too because it benefits their community. So that is a piece of it, but there is going to be, I believe, a fundamental discussion coming in British Columbia, probably this fall or winter, around oil and gas. And it's because the federal government is moving more in this direction around energy security and around our own economic security. And this is a long-standing area of conflict in British Columbia. So we have an oil tanker ban, which the federal government has to make a decision on first. We have got a lot of people in this province who rightly are concerned about the environment. We have a complex First Nations environment. And then I think it's fair to say that a lot of citizens in British Columbia would probably be more on the center to center left, the way that they feel about energy and the energy development. But it is one of the pathways that we have to look at to not only better the communities throughout British Columbia, from the north right to the south, but First Nations and also our own energy security at a time when the geopolitics are requiring Canada to take a leadership role in this.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. You mentioned, of course, partnerships with First Nations. And I don't know whether or not you saw this just recently, the Lake Babine First Nation in West Fraser. They worked for a number of years to move management of a significant area under control of the First Nation. And it's securing the future for West Fraser, but also providing tremendous economic benefit to the First Nation and the communities as well. This is the kind of innovative thinking that we need to have, and it's the sort of collaboration that's required to be able to move projects forward. In light of what we were talking about, the roadblocks that seem to be in the way of permitting projects.
The consultation piece with First Nations is integral to get that community support, but for those communities to understand and to support that there is going to be benefit to their communities is a really big, important piece of that. And so that equity partnership, or partnership in some sort of sense, has to happen. And you're certainly seeing it when I was just part of a conversation just very recently, and it's the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. That is the work that they're doing. And so those are the kinds of things that are happening that need to happen. And then those kinds of barriers are being unlocked in partnership together.
So you issued the 3% growth, GDP growth challenge at the beginning of the year, and you wrote to the Premier and to all the ministers. What's the uptake been like?
Well, I would say that they did like the idea and they did somewhat embrace it. However, I think what's important to recognize is that there was no commitment to it, and it comes at a time where there are very challenging decisions that the finance minister has to make as she is building her budget. That backdrop of the fiscal restraint is significant. But that 3% challenge, one of the reasons we did it is because, any business out there has to set revenue targets or sales targets. And every quarter, they measure themselves against those targets, and every year they do. And so how does a business know if it's had a good year or a bad year? Well, how did it measure up against its targets? We're saying to government, that's the mindset that's needed. Set some targets and try and make that goal. And so I have yet to see government put any kind of KPIs in any of their kinds of legislation or goals. And it's certainly something that we think governments, not just the British Columbia government, but governments, in Canada and right across Canada, the federal government, why can't they have KPIs? Every business does. And certainly it's a way then that voters could say, hey, yeah, you're on target, you're on track, or, you've missed the mark, and now I'm going to make a different decision.
Okay, so how do we move that bar? I mean, we're having this discussion, and you hope that it's going to motivate somebody to say, okay, we can do this differently. But I'm worried that we're really good at talking. We're saying we're putting up our elbows, we're going to get together, we're going to eliminate this, do the next thing. And after 6 months of talking like that, we're still in the starting blocks.
That's what keeps me up at night, Stu. I think the risk is that we are going to lose this generational opportunity. The United States has forced our hand, and there are many, many things we can do in British Columbia and across Canada to get our own house in order. And if we don't do it now, we have missed the opportunity. And we are going to be so much farther behind. So how are we going to get there? It takes a grassroots movement. It takes not just the business community, but it takes citizens across the board to say, you know what? Economic growth matters to me. It matters to me because it's going to make my life better, because I'm going to get better health care, because I'm going to get better education for my kids. I'm going to get more daycare. I'm going to get all of those things that government provides because it gives more revenue to government. But unless we have the individuals thinking that and amplifying that, there's going to be that disconnect, and it's going to become business versus government, which isn't helpful for anyone.
We had this discussion last year about how important it is that collectively we envision a stronger economy, a much more significant place on the planet than we do. We have a tendency to go, well, it's just little old us. But no, we're in a very unique spot to be able to capitalize on so many opportunities. It's now incumbent upon us to do it.
Everybody says Canada is the best place to live and British Columbia is the best place to live, and we are best positioned. I actually do believe that's true, whether we're talking about energy security, food security, we're talking about innovation and life sciences, all of the things that make Canada and British Columbia particularly great. And we're positioned so close to the Indo-Pacific region, so that trade corridor is incredibly important. Canada's largest port here in Vancouver. But again, we can't miss this opportunity. We cannot let risk and risk-averse governments hold back growth in the private sector. The only way that we're going to do this is for government to unleash some of the barriers so that private sector can thrive.
And so then it's incumbent upon all of us that we send that message. Let's get behind economic growth because it's to the benefit of all.
Economic growth equals revenue to government equals better health care, better education, more daycare, and all of the services that we rely on government for.
Well, let's hope that the message starts to get through. Thank you, Bridgitte.
Thank you.